you got Hulk butt, too. Like, that's just a bonus.
Green CGI butt. I don't know. I'm not really sure whose thing that is, but it's somebody's. Hello and welcome to SnarkSquad Pod, the media podcast where you ruined everything, you stupid bitch. I am Nicole Sweeney.
My name is Marines.
And joining us this week is a friend of yours from high school, yes? You guys are high school friends?
Middle school and high school, indeed.
Whoa, middle school friends. Damn. Introduce yourself.
My name is Rich Camelucci. I am a co-host of what is arguably the worst named podcast on the internet, but definitely the worst named wrestling podcast, Podswoggle, a wrestling podcast with, and here's the important part, entertainment. I also co-host The Blank Slate, which is basically exactly that, just a place for me and a few other people just to kind of talk about literally whatever we want. And I'm also the president and co-founder of Arcade Audio, where you can find said podcast as well as a bunch of other shows that span genres of movies, music to improv, narrative stuff. A lot of really cool stuff we're doing over there.
That's exciting. That's a lot of things. Cool. Well, thank you for making the time to join us. This week, we are talking about all three of the Thor movies. We're doing them as a batched set because there's like a million MCU movies now, and there's no way we're doing them one at a time. So we're doing the Thor movies collectively. And I'm going to hand it back to Rich to give us a synopsis of the three Thor. So that's Thor, Dark World, and Thor Ragnarok.
Whew. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Usually people have to give like a synopsis for a thing, and we're giving you three things. Go.
Thor. Frost giants wanted to freeze the 9 realms, starting with Earth, like way back in the day. So Odin got a truce, and he got that casket of winters, a.k.a. the greatest igloo cooler ever made. If they had been a Disney property at this point, this would have been perfect crossover opportunity with Frozen. Cut to Thor's coronation. He's about to become king of Asgard, but we got White Walkers in the trophy room trying to get the cooler back, and they get dealt with by the Destroyer. Some faceless Lord Zed from Power Rangers looking thing. Thor and the gang, including Loki, head to the ice planet of Hoth to teach these Frosties a lesson. They get whooped up on. Odin bails them out. He puts the password protect on the hammer, Mjolnir. And then he puts Thor in timeout on Earth, where he literally runs into the Scientists 3. Jane Foster, Eric Svelvig, and Darcy Thomas? I just put Darcy.
Darcy, yeah.
Darcy. It's Darcy. Kooky fish out of water scenes commence. S.H.I.E.L.D., led by Agent Coulson, locates the hammer that fell to Earth shortly after Thor did. Thor makes a play for the hammer when they figure out where it is, but he gets got. We also catch our first glimpse of Hawkeye, which was crazy. I forgot about that.
Yeah. On
Asgard, Loki discovers that he was born a frost baby, but Odin took him in and raised him as one of their own in what I like to call a reverse Jon Snow scenario. Odin raised his voice and he got lightheaded and passed out. And then Loki gets up to his tricks while Odin's like bedridden. And he starts to play the Frost Giants with a plan to draw them in and then make himself look like a hero to his adopted parents. Oh, yeah. And then he also sends a destroyer to Earth after the Warriors 3 and Sif, of course, when they convinced Heimdall to look the other way and open the Bifrost to Earth. They get to Earth. Destroyer gets to Earth. He's blowing up Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. He's about to kill the Warriors when Thor learns about this concept of self-sacrifice, which is what needed to happen to bring Mjolnir back to him. He defeats the Destroyer. They head back to Asgard, deal with Loki, whom's about to blow up the north of the Wall planet where all the Frost Giants are. Mm-hmm. But
just, casual genocide. No big deal.
It's just a whole planet. And he's about to do that with the Bifrost, but is thwarted when Thor hammers it off of the Rainbow Bridge completely, and then Loki falls into space. Post-credit scene, Nick Fury asks Svelvig, who is being controlled by an invisible Loki to take a look at some sort of powerful cube. What we learned to be, or what we have already learned, I guess, depending on when Captain America happened. Oh,
So I think Captain America was after
this.
Was it after this?
that,
Okay.
Yeah.
It's so hard to keep it all in line.
Yes.
But it's the Tesseract. So that's Thor. And then Thor the Dark World. Forever ago, dark elves wanted to make all the realms dark. Using this entity called the Ether, and Bor, Odin's dad, stopped them. He thought he killed them all and buried the Ether deep in a stone column since it can't be destroyed. The head elf and a few other elves are able to slip away and put themselves in like a suspended animation. Loki goes to jail, which isn't as good as Loki Scared Stupid, but it's better than Loki Goes to Camp. He goes to jail for attacking... I'm sneaking in every pop culture reference I can.
Every single one.
But he's going to jail for attacking New York City. See the Avengers. Thor and the gang are trying to get all the realms back in order after they all lost their minds when the Bifrost was destroyed. It's since been rebuilt. And about now, the convergence is close to happening. What's that? It's this super rare thing where all 9 realms are aligned, and it causes all sorts of weird portal and physics anomalies to pop up. And while in London, Jane Foster and Darcy find some of those portals. Jane gets teleported to this place where the ether is and gets infected with it. That triggers the elves to wake back up, and it is on. While Jane was teleported, Heimdall couldn't see her, and that dude sees everything. So Thor goes to Earth and gets back just when Jane gets back. She isn't well. He takes her back to King's Landing, which is a little touchy with Dad. And while they're arguing over whether or not she should be there, the Dark Elves plan an attack on Asgard to get the ether out of Jane. And in protecting her, Thor's mother, Frigga, gets freaking got by the elves, and she is dead. But then they are all driven out by Thor. Despite being forbidden to leave Asgard, Thor cooks up an Ocean's 11-esque plan, including breaking Loki out of prison to draw Malekith away from Asgard so he doesn't attack him again. And then when they do draw them out, Loki gets Malekith to get the ether out of Jane. Oh my God, this is a hell of a lot of stuff to happen. And when he gets it out of Jane, Thor's supposed to destroy it. He doesn't. Loki dies in sacrificing himself. Malekith heads to Earth for the main convergence point so he can finally turn off those cosmic lights. Thor and Jane catch up with Buddy on Earth and use portals and science. They defeat Malekith in a very cool video game-inspired climax. Back in Asgard, Thor declines the throne from Odin and tells him how Loki sacrificed himself in battle. Thor leaves, and surprise, Odin was actually Loki. Mid-credit scene, Volstagg and Sif, some of the Warriors 3, bring the ether, aka the Reality Stone, to the Collector in Nowhere. See Guardians of the Galaxy.
Looks so fucking shady. Like, I just like that whole cutscene is just so like, it's real bad if these two things are kept together. Let's leave one of them with this very suspicious looking man. Great plan. Let's.
He says, I will definitely keep it safe. And you're like, oh, yeah. You definitely won't.
Anyway, sorry, you're only 2/3 of the way done. Carry on.
No, I mean, that's a great point. But yeah, so they leave what is the Reality Stone with the Collector, and especially since they already have the Space Stone, aka the Tesseract, and yeah, like you said, they got to spread them around. Post-credit scene, Thor comes back to make out with Jane. Ragnarok. Now for something completely different. Thor's out there searching for the Infinity Stones after Age of Ultron, and he's imprisoned by the fire demon Surtur, who tells him that Odin isn't in Asgard and he will be the one that brings about Ragnarok, aka the fall of Asgard. Thor defeats him. Thor heads back to Asgard, Surtur's crown in tow, finding Heimdall is on the lam for having helped them with their escape plan from Dark World. He has committed high treason. And he also comes back to find Loki portraying Odin while some merry band of hack actors reenact Loki's death from Dark World. They head on to Earth, Thor and Loki do, to find where Loki left Odin. They hang out with Doc Strange for a spell. See what I did there? And eventually they find him in Norway, where just before he dies, oh, by the way, you have a sister. She was banished, but don't worry. She'll be free when I kick the bucket. And oh, by the way, she's the goddess of death and draws her power from Asgard. Bye.
Yep.
Accurate.
Hela then appears from the smoke, crumbles Thor's hammer like it's a scone. Loki summons the Bifrost to get him and Thor out of there, but Hela catches a ride and knocks Loki and Thor out of the Bifrost separately, landing them on Sakaar and bringing her home to Asgard. On Asgard, Hela murders everyone, wakes up her zombie army, and Difford the big dead dog. Using the eternal flame. While that's going on, a renegade Heimdall is helping people hide from Hela and, not die. On Sakaar, Thor falls into a dump from a wormhole that could be found and captured by Valkyrie, a former Asgardian gladiator, and sold as a prisoner with job to the Grandmaster for his contest of champions, aka death matches. Loki's already been there for a minute and is in with the Grandmaster. Thor meets Korg, a Rockman revolutionary, and gets ready for his main event bout with, as it turns out, the Hulk. Hulk has already been there for some time, having flown the Quinjet at the end of Age of Ultron into space, having gone through a wormhole and become the most over babyface on Sakaar. Thor convinces Valkyrie, Loki, and what eventually becomes again Bruce Banner to escape Sakaar to go save Asgard from Hela and Ragnarok. With an assisted revolution led by Korg, Loki tries a betrayal, but peace out, dude. Everyone saw that coming because you're Loki. Passing through the devil's anus, our heroes make it to Asgard. Just before Hela is about to lay waste to all the Asgardians in hiding, the battle commences as the Korg revolution, now led by Loki, shows up to give the Asgardian refugees safe passage. As Hela is about to snap Thor's neck, he has a platform 9 3/4 moment with Odin, letting Thor know that Asgard isn't a place, it's a people and a state of mind, like Margaritaville, my dude. This cues Thor to instruct Loki to grab Surtur's crown from the beginning of the movie, throw it into the eternal flame, bringing about Ragnarok, bringing down the source of Hela's power, Asgard. They're all aboard the ship. Thor's finally made king. They decide to head to Earth. Mid-credits, they get intercepted by a large ship that looks like a mean ship. And then post-credits, Grandmaster, emerging from the wreckage of a ship, is greeted by rebels and decides to call the rebellion a tie on all sides. How'd I do?
That good.
Yes. That was a lot.
Yes. Okay, so yes, that was a mouthful. I think that because that was like a lot, because it was so much, a logical place to start is just like getting a feel for everyone's familiarity with all things MCU, because I think that probably shapes how you can read and track and follow the events of these three movies. So I picked this for the podcast because I wanted to watch them before seeing Infinity War. Now that I have seen the three Thor movies, which I watched explicitly for this podcast, I still only have left Black Panther. Oh, and Ant-Man. Black Panther and Ant-Man. Which, I don't know, maybe I won't see Ant-Man. I don't really care. But otherwise, I've seen everything else. And then obviously Infinity War, because I just finished watching these movies. But I am curious. So I'm just curious what everyone else has seen.
For me, if you would have asked me like before now what my familiarity was with the MCU, I would have been pretty confident that I was like pretty well versed. But then looking back, as we started Thor 2, I kind of had this moment of like, wait, what happened like between the movies? So I actually went and checked. I've only ever seen Phase 1. So all of the originals of like Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America.
Avengers Assemble.
And the Avengers Assemble. And then I've seen Ant-Man and Spider-Man Homecoming, and that's it.
Okay.
I'm not up to date by any means. And there were a lot of places while I was watching where I was like, I don't know what's going on. So
Okay.
I have seen before coming on here to do this and watch the movies. I had seen all of the MCU movies with the exception of Thor: Dark World, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man Homecoming. So I've been doing a pretty good job up until recently. And even then, like, a lot of the more recent movies have a lot more crossover with characters that do like a pretty good job of like serving as an advertisement for the other movies.
Yes.
So like at this point, I'm like, oh yeah, I really do want to see Doctor Strange and and Spider-Man. And
I borrowed these movies from a friend. Actually, our next episode that we're recording tomorrow, because behind the scenes magic, The Last Jedi. So a friend of mine lent me 3 movies that I'm watching this weekend. He is the keeper of all the Blu-rays. But I texted him when Doctor Strange showed up in this, and I was like, I realized when he appeared here that I have built up so much like resentment for like the movie. I was super I thought the movie had a lot of really cool visual stuff, but like everything from the whitewashing. This is like a super petty thing, but it infuriates me to no end that they insisted on keeping the character American while casting Benedict Cumberbatch, because his accent in that movie, this one it's fine, but his accent in that movie was like so distracting and like it's so unnecessary. You already have the like billionaire New Yorker character in the MCU. Just fucking make him British. Let him be British. Let Benedict Cumberbatch use his beautiful voice and be British and whatever. And like, I don't know. So I've also seen all of the like the Netflix shows, with the exception of I only watched the first episode of Iron Fist and couldn't continue. And when Doctor Strange appeared, I was like, oh, he's like the Iron Fist of the movie universe for me. Like the character that it's there, and like I accept that he's there, but like also I kind of wish he weren't. So anyway, sorry, tangent about my hatred for Doctor Strange, not relevant to this Thor conversation at all, except I did not enjoy those 5 minutes of the movie. Could have done without his whole appearance.
As my tangent, in my head, Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hiddleston are the same person. So when they were on the screen together and being not the same person, I was like, rude. This is like totally messing with my own perception of who these people are.
Space-time continuum is broken.
I know. I didn't like it either. Anyways, we hijacked it completely from Rich.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, that was basically all I had
to make sure I
as
got
far
my,
as all those.
Did you like read the comic? Do you have any prior familiarity with any of this stuff, like pre-MCU?
Not at all. I do, however, have friends that do, and I like from the outset of Iron Man, and at the end of that, seeing that it's going to be part of like something bigger. I started basically I would pellet them with questions about where could this go? What does that mean? Is that an Easter egg for this? And they would indulge me greatly as far as like all the different story arcs and like give me good recommendations. And I would pick up a few here and there, not a lot. Never really got into any of the stories themselves, but I felt like I was given a pretty good education by a lot of my comic book reading friends.
That's fair. Yeah, that was sort of my approach to the game of A Song of Ice and Fire books. Like,
same.
Until we're reading them now for the podcast. So like I will now be a person who actually knows about the books. But I like basically acquired all of the knowledge because we were recapping the show, and so I spent so much time reading the like A Song of Ice and Fire wikis that I should have just fucking read the books. Like, the amount of time that I spent like ingesting wiki information, I don't know what I was saving for like myself for in that effort, but it's fine. I now have all that knowledge in my brain.
And I don't know, it's just funny you bring up like Game of Thrones because I also made like 80 Game of Thrones references in the synopsis. But like there is big time feel, like crossover feel, especially almost exclusively in the first 2 Thor movies. And the second one is kind of no coincidence because the director like directed a bunch of Game of Thrones episodes. So like, that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. That's the like, wait, the ice things, were the ice things the first one or the second one?
The first one.
Those are the first. Okay, sorry, never mind. It's all blurred together in my head now because we watched them all together. But as far as the like Game of Thrones feeling, they literally were. It was like the White Walkers, except they're all the Night King. Like that. Yeah. Like that was the like the aesthetic that they were rocking.
Like same character design and everything, and even like those conversations between Odin and Thor about like what wise kings do, and it just heavy Game of Thrones vibes.
Yeah, totally. I also, speaking of, sort of vibes from other things, I just recently read American Gods for the first time, and I guess this is an American Gods spoiler. The first sort of like there's a character that we meet at the outset of American Gods, and like, I don't know, maybe halfway through the book, we learn that this character, Mr. Wednesday, is actually Odin, and Loki is also a character in that book as well. And so starting this, it was really, really interesting. So I listened to the book rather than like reading a physical copy, and it was a like full cast production audiobook. And the guy who did the Odin voice on the audiobook was very, very good. And like I like briefly like stopped to look up. I was like, did Anthony Hopkins do the? It was not. But it sounded very similar. So I just had this moment of like, oh damn, yes, Odin. That was a weird thing, like tracking that throughout. I had this like all of these other feelings of like, this is what Odin is supposed to be. And I don't know. And it's interesting because I know nothing about Norse mythology. And so I don't really have any sort of like clear, background on where everybody is drawing on, like what everybody is drawing on to get these characterizations.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to feel all of the ways in which these things were similar, I guess without having any sort of background to like recognize that, oh yes, these are the elements of these characters that you're drawing on. I still felt the ways in which these two radically different stories, right? Like this comic book movie and then this novel. I don't even know how to characterize that book, but like they're radically different properties, but both dealing, like Odin is a character in both of them, and like there were elements of both Odins that like felt, I don't know, connected. So that was just interesting.
That is kind of the weird thing about this, because I remember when all these movies were first starting to get announced, they announced Thor, and I guess I'd always sort of known that Thor was also like a Marvel Comics character, but I never really thought about it. And so when I was asking my friends about like, oh yeah, and so, okay, so Spider-Man fits in this way and Captain America, oh, that's great. Wait, hold on. Thor's Thor. Like Thor's a thing. Like it's a mythology. How the heck is Thor a comic book character? And it like sort of gave me like a reason as far as like, he got like banished to Earth and was just like this regular dude, and it was kind of like a Clark Kent situation, and it was like kind of weird, but it's like, I guess if that's how they're going to get Thor specifically and all of Norse mythology, into this.
Comics, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I guess if you want to do that, knock yourself out.
I had a few moments like that. I think it was in the second or third movie, again, blurring in my head because I watched all 3 today before we press play or record. Yeah. So there's a moment like that where Loki and Thor end up in New York. I guess this is the third movie after, when they're looking for their dad, and they're in plain clothes. Like they specifically like change into plain clothes, and like Thor's walking around with his little man pony and like jeans on, and I was just like, this is so weird. Like they're like gods and also aliens, but he's got his little man pony on. So like the going back and forth between like, I don't know, the mythology, the god aspect of it, but also like the alien aspect of it. It definitely is juggling a lot.
Yeah, which is, going back and watching these in retrospect, it's sort of compelling how between this series of movies and the Guardians movies are the ones that just not only kind of like break the whole universe wide open and crack it open beyond Earth, but also like become a huge linchpin down the road, like phase 2, phase 3.
Yes. That was why, like, I had kind of had no real interest in seeing I just didn't really care about Thor. Although, again, my experience with this was similar to my experience with Captain America. I similarly was like, I don't really care. But then I watched it and I was like, okay, wait, he's the best one. And now I have watched this and I also am like, oh wait, Thor is awesome. But I kind of didn't care until I saw trailers for Ragnarok, because I was like, well, fuck, Tessa Thompson and Cate Blanchett. Like, now I am interested. I'm still not interested in Thor, but I am interested in Cate Blanchett and Tessa Thompson. And then going into Infinity War, I was like, it seems like I've seen everything else, but I still feel like I don't wholly understand this story. Like, there are pieces that I'm missing, and I feel like those pieces are in the Thor movies. Like, it's weird how these movies, I think more so than the others, are much more like connected. I guess Captain America Civil War is like a possible exception because that's basically an Avengers movie. But like in general, these movies seem much more interconnected than I think the others have been, which is part of why I wanted to start with that question of like, what else have you seen? Because I think like Murray was saying, like after not having seen like Ultron, and then you go through the second and third movie there, the third movie in particular, there's a bunch of all of these references where you're like, wait, I don't know what's happening here. And like the Loki's imprisonment at the beginning of the second movie, that is dealt with in a way that is very, very weird for the standalone-ness of these movies. Like I don't think it worked. Like you have to see Avengers. Like it's not, I don't know. It was too weird. I think that handling, I don't think that they properly got you from where we last saw him to the second movie, if you were only watching the Thor movies. And
I had seen Avengers. Like I had seen Avengers, and I remember that movie, and I still started Thor 2, and I was like, wait, what? Because I hadn't, like, there is an element of having to almost watch them sequentially to really understand what's carrying in from one movie into the other. And I told Nicole this, that it took me a moment to really remember what had happened in the Avengers. And the thing that I kind of like clicked in my head was that gif of the Hulk like smashing Loki around, and I was like, oh yeah, like Loki was in that movie. He was like the big bad in the Avengers. Like that kind of all brought it. But it's this idea of like, even in I don't know, that like the Harry Potter books, every time you start a new book, it kind of gives you like, Harry Potter is a wizard and he's at this school, and it gives you like a little recap just to make sure we're on the same page, right? And these movies were just like, nah, man, either you know or you don't know. And it just like jumped right in.
Which is kind of ironic because like one important thing that I've heard writers of comic books mention when they talk about the process is the idea that any issue could be someone's first comic. So you do have to go through the process of, no matter how sort of annoying or tedious it may be, of sort of reintroducing people into this world or introducing people into this world. And yeah, like it's weird because it's not a television series, but it wouldn't hurt probably to put a previously on like trailer basically before any of these movies. Cause like, yeah, like you said, it just kind of threw you right into it. And for crying out loud, you mentioned that gif of Thor just swinging Loki around. That happens in Ragnarok to Thor, and Loki reacts, right. And that's a 5-year callback,
right?
Which is amazing,
right?
And if you get it, great. And if you don't, sure, it's fine. I guess something weird happened, and I don't know. I'll ask somebody later. But yeah, and it's weird. Part of it is, I kind of want to say like arrogance, almost like early Thor-esque arrogance, because he was pretty arrogant, and that's what he needed to learn, is to not be so arrogant. Oh, lessons. But yeah, of just like, oh, you've all seen our movies by now. And I'm sure you're watching all of them before the next one comes out, so we're good.
I would push back on the idea of it being arrogance, because it feels like that is part of the point of what they are constructing here. And so when I say that there is that these movies do not entirely stand alone, I think that the filmmakers would counter with that's the point. And I think that while they are being released as individual movies, that's how they are coming out, and they're not, being released as television show episodes. I feel they're clearly trying to construct this cohesive world in that way. And I think, maybe it doesn't work for everyone, because there are obviously going to be a ton of people who are only going to see these in fragments. That has been my experience. I have watched them in sort of this kind of way. And so how well that's going to work is gonna vary from thing to thing, but I think that's the point. The point is they're trying to construct something that while it is being released as individual standalone movies, they are functionally episodes in a 10-year-long TV show, basically.
For sure.
That's intentional. And whether or not that's a good idea is a separate whatever, but I don't know that I would describe it as arrogant. I think it's ambitious.
Yeah.
I think it is ambitious. And again, whether or not it's a good idea, I at the very least think that it is, I don't know, fair to applaud the ambition of that, I guess.
I think that's closer to more so what I was trying to get at. But yeah, and I think Kevin Feige would agree as well, as far as it is all part of this bigger thing. And even towards phase 2 and phase 3, they sort of started to get filmmakers that had more of a defined style, or Winter Soldier was a spy movie.
Yes.
Ant-Man was a heist movie. Ragnarok was this trippy space canon-esque from the 80s comedy.
Good. So good.
Yeah. And it's cool to kind of see them give leeway and let these really talented filmmakers, they give them some space to work. But
yes.
Also please be sure you hit these overall points that are kind of important to our bigger picture. But yeah, it's cool that it is working like that. Who'd have even thought to, I don't know. It's incredibly commendable that they even attempted this. It's wild.
As someone who, in this current season of my podcast life, is watching a bunch of crap that I don't have any context for, I am also going through this with all of the Star Wars movies. I watched The Last Jedi today as well. Movie number 4, if you're keeping track at home. That was my... And I feel there's an element of not knowing as well. And I think that they make a lot of references and callbacks to the previous installments in this universe, which admittedly one is across many more years, and I think probably has, because of those more years, it's more maybe prolific in the way that it affects pop culture. So there was a lot more that I was able to absorb from pop culture, I would say, for the Star Wars movies versus the MCU stuff. But that being said, I feel when I'm watching a Star Wars films, there are times where I'm I feel this person is significant, or this thing that I just saw is significant in a way I don't have context for, but that does not disrupt the story, the singular story that is being told in the movie that I am watching. Where in these Thor movies, they were specifically calling back plot moments and visual things and even lines of dialogue that I didn't have reference for. So it was a completely different experience where it felt like I was missing an entire train to lead me into the next plot thing, instead of a vague reference of who that person is or why this is significant. I don't know if that makes sense, but just having had the two experience so back to back, it was really, I don't know, it felt very apparent to me the way that those two things are different. So I get a little bit of what you're saying, Nicole, but I do get a little bit of that arrogance, just in so much as hey, we know you've seen our movies, so we're just going to keep talking about them. So, and I thought that was interesting, and it did lose me a little bit at the beginning of these movies, but it kind of went away as you keep watching.
So we have been talking for half an hour now, and we still haven't asked the "Do you like this?" question. And you know what? Now is as good a time as any. I mostly because I really want to hear Mari's answer to this.
Oh, okay. So I'm up.
Yeah, you're up. You're up.
I generally very much enjoy. You probably wouldn't guess by the fact that I'm not keeping up with them, but I do enjoy superhero stories because I enjoy good guys. I enjoy like plain good versus bad guy stories versus anti-heroes. Check out a previous episode of our podcast. But I do enjoy superhero stories, and I really enjoyed these. I thought that they were fun. I probably have my only unpopular opinion is probably that I liked Thor 1 more than Thor 2, but Thor 3 I thought was the best of all three.
That's interesting because my perception is the idea that Thor 1 is generally liked and approved of, and where Thor Dark World is met with apathy, if not just derision. Like anytime I ever told someone like, oh yeah, the only thing I haven't seen is the second Thor, they're like, you're not missing anything.
Okay.
Interesting.
So 1 and 3 were a rewatch, and 2 was for the first time. Thor 1 to me did not hold up on a rewatch, mostly for visual reasons, just because Kenneth Branagh can not direct. And Dark World, maybe I was just more just open to liking it because it actually looked like a real movie and not like one of the Chris Columbus Harry Potter movies. And then yeah, Ragnarok was just like off the charts great, and just what a wild departure they did for many reasons. But yeah, that's where I'm at. Like overall, but yeah, I feel like 1 was the weakest installment of the bunch.
So I also was under the same impression that Mari was under, again, because of the friend that I borrowed these movies from is like a big Marvel MCU like nerd, loves these movies. Thor, the first one is the only one that he didn't own because he was like, yeah, I don't need to see that again. And so like that one, I had to rent that one, and then I borrowed the other two. And I realize now that I probably didn't actually talk to anybody but him, but I just was like, these are Nick's opinions. Okay. And so I bet I think these are the fan opinions of these movies. So he feels everything that you just said. He's like at home nodding. He's going to listen to this episode, and then he's going to text me and be like, yes, that sounds like the same kind of issues he would have. My feelings are the same as Mari's in that I enjoyed the first one more than the second one. I think that my problem with the second one, my feeling on Thor, and I feel like there's another conversation to be had later about like the MCU in a bigger picture kind of way. We've toyed with the idea of doing like phase episodes, like phase 1 movies, so on and so forth. But I think that Thor as a character and like these movies were at their best when they were lighthearted, like when they were leaning into sort of the levity of it. And I think that was true in the first one, and like is much of the magic that's happening in the third one. And like the second one just felt, it was like a lot of the like, let's do dark and gritty things, and it felt a lot less joyful. And that made it, I still liked it, but I also probably won't ever go out of my way to watch that movie again unless we end up doing this phase thing. Like that's basically the only, like, unless we find another reason that I will have to watch it for the podcast, I probably won't ever watch the second one again. The third one, Ragnarok, I could watch that shit all the time. I loved it. It was so just like, it's like I liked the first one more than the second one, but then like in a whole other category way above the rest of them was Ragnarok, because it was just like joyful to watch. Like the aesthetic of it was joyful. The big like fight scene after the final big fight scene after he like gets his lightning, gets, super lightnings hella, and then like the music, the like rock soundtrack plays and everybody's, there's all of that. Like that whole thing, like all of that was shot in this, like it's a big fight scene in which many lives are on the line, and yet like somehow it's still played in this way that is like joyful. And I think that there is something to be said for the overall filmmaking of this movie that can happen. It reminded me a lot of the Ghostbusters remake, because I had a similar feeling seeing that in the theater there's a bit where, again, in the final battle, there's a version of the theme song that kind of sounds like in a sort of similar style starts playing, and like there's this slow motion matrixy thing of Kate McKinnon like shooting all these ghosts, and it's just like, it's like over the top, but like the aesthetic of it was so good, and it was like I was just so happy. I felt like overcome with joy watching it, and I felt the same way when this fight sequence started playing out. All the like little slow motion shots of everybody doing their punchy kicky thing. As somebody who like isn't super into fight stuff, that was really cool and exciting to watch, and I think it is representative of so much of what was happening in the way this film was made, if that makes sense.
I'm so glad that you brought up Ghostbusters because after having watched Ragnarok, I kind of just put the timeline together in my head, and that was like basically Chris Hemsworth going to comedy camp and like learning from the learning tree of Kate McKinnon and Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy and Leslie Jones and Paul Feig and like literally everyone else that was associated with that movie. And then him like putting those newfound chops to work in Ragnarok in an incredibly nuanced way that really kind of solidified itself for me on the second watch, because by the time we get to Ragnarok, like in the first Thor, he's a little quippy, but he's mostly playing kind of like the fish out of water angle a little bit.
I think I just also really like fish out of water type stuff too. So
I do too. I was going to mention
it works. It works. It is time
that one
tested.
Is very like your mileage may vary. Like I get why that is maybe not some people's jam, but it's totally mine.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
And there were some things that were for me like a little corny in the first Thor, like it being a Kenneth Branagh Shakespearean directed movie, and by the end of it, him and Jane Foster are literally star-crossed lovers.
Right.
Whereas in Dark World, it does get a little darker, it does get a little gritty. But also, I was just caught way off guard for the fact that Chris O'Dowd was in it for like a bit part. If I had known Chris O'Dowd from the IT crowd was in the movie, I probably would have given it a look a little sooner because he's awesome.
Yeah. He was very underutilized. I mean, I have no idea what else you could have done with him, to be sure. But
I still don't know what his role was in the movie other than to make a phone call.
Yep. Basically, yes, he existed to make a phone call later in the movie. That was his entire purpose.
But yeah, and like, so in that movie, he almost loses Jane. He loses his mom. And then at a certain point when they're kind of trying to break out of Asgard with Loki and Jane on that like sort of vehicle. Basically, when you get Loki and Thor on screen together finally in that movie, it starts to they got great chemistry. It gets a little bit electric and they quip well against each other. The Captain America cameo had me guffawing. I did not expect that. It was very funny. And then like the banter between the two like really gave the movie a shot of life, like right when it needed it too, like right when you couldn't take any more like doom and gloom. It's like, oh, okay, cool. But then moving on to Ragnarok, when you consider the fact that like, so he's lost his mother, he has broken up with Jane, and then eventually he loses his father as well. Like a lot of his humor in that movie is almost completely like that sort of deflecting of my actual feelings humor of like, yeah, I'm going to make a joke right here because I don't want to have to think about any of this. I'm going to give myself a mission right here because it's better than sitting alone with my thoughts. And and man, when that hit me, I was like, oh no. Oh, we're dealing with
Thor.
life things. Well, and it's a fun, well, not fun. Why did I say fun? It's a
Life things aren't fun.
But it was a really disarming way to sort of sneak those kind of themes in there, like, into this character that is a god.
Right.
And just giving humanity to a god. Something of which, like, also the villains overall could have used. I feel like Hela was the best of all the villains, but that's just because Cate Blanchett is an amazing talent.
Yeah, she could just strut around the screen and it's fine. Like, I'm like, yep, I'm intimidated. You've done it.
I think part of the reason that 2 didn't work for me was that it felt in a lot of ways like a rinse and repeat. Like, instead of the White Walkers, we had the evil elves now. And even just the way it started with Odin's voiceover. And a long time ago, we defeated these people, but did we? Like, I was like, oh my God, again? And it was again. It was again, but like you mentioned, darker and with a lot, without some of those humorous undertones. And so when 3 started, I actually sent Nicole a message and I was like, I think Thor just got a sense of humor in the 3rd movie. And she was like, no, like, he's had it all along. But I guess I forgot while I was watching too. But yeah, I get, and then the reason that I really enjoyed 1 more is because of the way that superhero movies have kind of evolved, especially because they have to keep outdoing each other, and because there is like this buildup of trauma where like you lose something in each movie and there's death and destruction and a new villain, and they just kind of keep getting darker. So why I appreciated Thor 1 was because it did feel dated, but in a way that it was like just a like silly romp of a superhero movie. Like, it was just kind of like, it was
fun.
Big. You're right. It was just big and loud and simple, and there weren't like 10 different threads and 10 different plans that failed. It was just like A to B, and I was happy and I enjoyed it. And then when you get back around to 3, I think it is more complex and it is darker, but they learned how to infuse those moments of humor so that you're not just on a path of doom and destruction the entire time.
Was it Kat Dennings lamenting the loss of her iPod that made the first one feel dated?
You know,
a little bit.
She just added 30 songs, you guys. 30 songs.
That was definitely a part that made me go, oh no! Oh,
I will say,
time is going to get all of us.
Kat Dennings repeatedly referring to the hammer as Mew Mew was my favorite. Because that is how I want to pronounce it all the time now. Like, yeah, Mew Mew.
Mew Mew.
Kat Dennings was an unsung hero for those first 2 movies.
She was great. She was so great. So delightful.
Listen, I feel like there are a few of those because Kat Dennings is one. I think Frigga was freaking amazing, and we don't learn that until she's killed in the second movie.
Until she dies a fucking warrior.
I know, amazing.
She was like persona non grata in the first movie, and in the second movie, like, oh, okay, yeah, that's why you cast Rene Russo. That's why you cast like someone with an actual like name, because like I would hope they have something to do.
The first one, she was just like, "Oh, I am motherly. Hello, here," and then Anyway, continue with the list.
Sif was another one for me that I was just like, if you could give her an entire movie, and I would watch it right now, and I don't understand why we're not following her around more. Thank you.
So I had a like weird kind of backwards experience of Sif. So the other thing that I am familiar with that I did not mention was Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I keep current on this show. I don't know why. Actually, I will say the first season is bad, but it gets better. And that is not like a push for anyone to watch it. I think that a show asking you to sit through a whole bad season is not fair. And by all means, don't bother. I, however, think that as the show has as it's gone on, it's gotten weirder and it's gotten better for its weirdness, if that makes sense. It's also like the two superpowered people who are series regulars are both like women of color. So there's that S.H.I.E.L.D. has over the whole rest of the MCU. However, Sif makes a number of appearances on S.H.I.E.L.D., on the early seasons of S.H.I.E.L.D., and she's super fucking cool. So I had like the experience that people watching S.H.I.E.L.D. had, that was like my experience watching Thor. I'm like, oh yeah, that chick, she's so cool. Like getting to see her pop up in Thor, which is actually where she appeared first.
Right, but, where she originated. You're like, oh, there you are.
So that was very delightful and fun. The truest unsung hero, though, is fucking Heimdall. Like, he's the coolest one.
Yes.
He's the best one.
So underused.
Heimdall, right? Okay, yes. So underused. Like, it's not until, like, the third movie that he really gets, like, to take a major proactive role.
Yeah, and he gets a beard and dreadlocks.
A beard and dreadlocks. But, yeah, he's so cool. Heimdall. Another character who I would happily watch his whole like spin-off movie. Sign me up.
So it's interesting. I was doing like some real half-assed research beforehand, and
that's my favorite kind.
Wikipedia.
Like early on, if the movie did well, something that could have been in the works was a Warriors 3 spinoff. With, that whole crew and Sif included. And then, man, they just got done so dirty in Ragnarok. Like, hey, Zachary Levi, you want to come do like a day of work? Not even? Cool, we just got to kill you off real quick. And another thing I was super high on about Dark World, one thing in particular that is pretty consistent over the entire MCU is our loud, clunky, third act fights. And this was, at least it felt to me, like the one trying to be that the least. And I've never played the video game Portal, but basically, from what I understand, this whole fight scene was basically the video game Portal.
Right.
But it was trying to do like something very different that like the other two didn't particularly do. And I appreciated that. And I thought it was a pretty decent action sequence that was at least felt different from a lot of the other ones. And even for Ragnarok, the director of that movie, Taika Waititi, he is not an action director at all. He did What We Do in the Shadows and Hunt of the Wilder People, which are two. I highly recommend those movies if anyone hasn't seen them, especially Hunt of the Wilder People. But yeah, they're like just very low key, just New Zealand talking head comedies kind of. And so he talked about like, yeah, when it came to all the big action stuff, they had a lot of very good experts to tell me what to do for that.
Right.
And I'll just handle like, this tone that you're letting me go for. Thanks.
Right. Recognizing where he could excel and like where to bring in, rely on outside input, basically. Yeah.
And then it's also like cool that they let him bring in basically like his regular roster of players. Like for example, what is Buddy Boy's name? Grandmaster. His Rachel House play his lieutenant, basically.
Yes.
She's in Hunt for the Wilder People. Sam Neill, who's also in that movie, plays Odin in the Play Within a Play that we get when Thor first gets back to Asgard. And we also get Luke Hemsworth playing Thor, which is a very funny wink and a nod. And then Matt freaking Damon playing Loki.
What?
Like what?
Wait, what? I did not notice that.
I mean,
my mind is just blown.
Yeah.
It's Matt Damon.
Beautiful.
That is amazing. I remember thinking, wow, this cast is really interesting because especially the Hemsworth brothers, like you pick up the look, like they look alike. So you're like, wait, who is that? And you saw that. And I noticed Loki and I was like, he doesn't even look like Loki. That was my thought. But I didn't even recognize the Ather like long enough to be like, who is that? It's Matt Damon. That is interesting. The cast obviously is like stacked when we're talking about like bit parts and we're like Matt Damon. And the one thing that I don't know if it was for better or for worse, I personally did not like Jane Foster's character. Like, I was kind of ambivalent about the whole thing. Especially in the first movie, it was like an insta-lovey, star-crossed kind of thing. And I just didn't like it. And then she's there for the second movie. She plays a really big part. And then in my, very half-assed researching, I found out that Natalie Portman, just her scheduling wise, couldn't be part of the third movie. So she's not here, and they just give him like a throwaway line about how Jane dumped him or whatnot.
Right.
And I think it was kind of like groan worthy because so much of the first two movies like hinge on the relationship between Thor and Jane Foster, but at the same time I was like, okay, bye. Like,
we got space stuff to do.
Yeah, good luck finding someone better than the God of Thunder, Jane Foster. Whatever.
Again, because of how I came at this stuff backwards and like watched, had watched all of S.H.I.E.L.D. before watching any of these movies, I was also a little bit annoyed that I was like, because clearly she would have just been brought into the fold. Like, just on the first one in general, like when they're taking all of her stuff, I was like, honestly, like the Phil Coulson of the TV show probably would have just hired her then. But like, okay, fine. They wait until the end of the movie to say, yeah, you can have your stuff back so you can do your research. But then in the second movie, when she's like, S.H.I.E.L.D's going to come in and like take over our site or whatever that we had unfettered access to, I was like, really? Like you still don't have a good relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D. Like S.H.I.E.L.D. knows how much you figured out on your own, and S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't in any way relying on you as a resource. Like, nope, sorry, I don't buy it. That's bullshit. So that bothered me a little bit as well. The opportunity to like use her character, I think it ties back to the sort of nothingness that was her character. Like, that is a way in which you could have, I don't know, done more with it. I think like let her be doing that. I'm not sure, but I agree that I also kind of didn't really care for / about Jane.
Had they cast some like no-name actress in that role, which I understand that you couldn't have, just because it's like the leading lady of this film, but had you cast someone who wasn't Natalie Portman, you probably could have included her in more things like the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show. You could have had her back for movie number 3, but it's just, I mean, I was surprised. I looked up before just to make sure that Idris Elba was in the third movie. I was like, are they going to keep him around? Like, I need to know. And just, bringing all of these really big name actors back time and time again is really impressive. The fact that Natalie Portman was the one that dropped out wasn't a big deal, but it kind of was when you look at like how the story tracks. To be like in the third movie and be like, oh yeah, she dumped me. Like, oh, really? Come on.
Yeah. It's very unceremonious.
Right.
Like, all this time that we spent getting invested, and it was like an off-screen breakup. More half-assed research. Natalie Portman was also pretty unhappy with the part and was kind of into it because she did have a much meatier role in the second installment. She was super on board, and pretty much what got her to sign on for the second one was the fact that it was originally supposed to be directed by Patty Jenkins, who ended up directing Wonder Woman. And then she left the project, and Boardman was just still kind of just stuck there. And then, she basically got out of the third movie by taking a break, like full on, just like taking a break, and like wasn't in anything until like 2010. And then she was in Annihilation last year, which I would love to hear you two talk about if you ever get a chance to. Because that's a pretty wild movie all on its own. But yeah, just unceremoniously dropped, which was... And also, like... You kind of have two other characters that are tied to you.
Right.
They got to eat too.
Right. Poor Kat Dennings is out there like, hello, I was in a major movie franchise.
So we've been talking for like an hour now, and we still have not at all discussed Loki, and that seems like a problem. So let's discuss Loki. I went into this, again, having only seen the Avengers movies, hadn't seen this. I knew that the internet super loved Loki. but my only experience with him was that he was like literally the major villain of the first Avengers movie. And like, I don't know, it is another one of those situations. And I feel like this happens quite often, in particular when we're dealing with anti-heroes, that you have a very charismatic actor in a role, and truly, like, Tom Hiddleston is fantastic here. He brings a ton of like charm and charisma to this character. All of his little banter with Thor, like the first Thor movie, like most of what is like funny about it is him. Like he is bringing a ton of that to the table. But I'm like, I don't know. Also, he's like a bad dude. I don't know, and I'm just like I'm not clear on why the internet loves him so much, I guess, is like where I came down at the end of this. Other than Tom Hiddleston's great.
Right. And I think for me, a lot of it is that like the internet, like the pop culture surrounding it almost. It was a very Kylo Ren thing for me as well, where all I knew was like what the internet had told me and that he was a villain. So it wasn't the movies per se, because I think the movie does a really good job of showing that the reason that we go back and forth is because we're going back and forth with Thor, who is his brother. And so like Thor and his behavior, there are a lot of times where people are like, okay, Loki's the worst. And I think that's acknowledged. And you understand why they give him chances in certain situations, because he is another god and he is sometimes willing to help them. So within the context of the movie, like, I got it. I don't think it was doing too much to excuse Loki's behavior. So that was fine. It was all of the outside stuff that I know about how people treat Loki, and that I was like, but like casual genocide is kind of his jam. Like, what are you guys talking about? Like, I just don't understand where like the fandom is really coming from there. I don't know. I don't get it either.
Yeah, no, the fandom like is a lot like an amalgamation of a lot of those things, as far as like on an outside perspective, just the magnetism of Tom Hiddleston.
Right.
He's a hell of a charismatic performer, and you just want to like, yeah, it's a natural like attraction to that. And then partner that with, in the movies, it's just like seeing the potential for good in somebody and how well he and Thor work together when they do work together. It's really cool. And you want to see that like be fleshed out to its full potential. But then we do know, and no one should ever be surprised anymore. That's why it was like so just casual in Ragnarok when Loki went to betray Thor. Thor's like, yeah, dog, I knew you were going to do this. Like,
every time.
You fool, you're a snake. Yes, I understand this. Right. And so, like, to me, whenever I think of anti-hero, because I was originally going into this thing, like, man, yeah, Loki's totally an anti-hero. But my like definition of it, like when I was listening to your podcast on anti-heroes, the character that kept running through my mind just because of me was Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Oh, this is good. Yes, go on.
He was a chaotic good. He was basically just that bat out of hell, but like he had a moral conscience of like, you know, I just want to do these things, these good things, and like these nefarious forces that get in front of me, I have to overcome them. And just by my rough around the edges personality, I might drive a beer truck into the arena and douse you all with beer. I'm sorry. That's just who I am. And whereas for like Loki, like anytime he does something good and for the greater good of anything else, it's so begrudging to him. It's not like he does it naturally or instinctly. He has to be strong-armed into doing it. And in Ragnarok, when he tries to betray Thor, and Thor's like, you dummy, no. And he's laying there writhing in pain from the obedience thing. He says to him, you'll always be the god of mischief, but you could be more.
Right.
You know, and that's the thing. Like, that's the potential that we just want to see.
I think there is, after watching all three movies, I'm suspecting that what people enjoy is Loki. Like, people want Loki to be a little shit, and that's what they're enjoying. I don't think... that's the impression that I get after watching all of the movies. I personally don't enjoy the characters that are going to be little shits for 3 movies in a row. Like, that's not my jam. And then also I think that gets lost in translation when you enter a lot of these fan spaces and it's just like a lot of squeeing over the actor or the character. Yeah. So I think that it just gets lost that he's not a good most of the time, and when he is a good, it's like Rich said, it's like it took like, you know, the first 2 acts of this movie to guilt him into being a good, and you're still not even sure he's like totally there, because at the end of the movie he's like ha ha ha, and he escapes to do something bad again. So I don't know. It's the confusion of entering the fan space and having it be like a big party and you know, unending gift sets of Tom Hiddleston or Loki that I'm just a little confused about. But, you know, everybody, you do you. What can I say?
Right. Indeed. And with that, I think we're gonna do us and leave this this recording. Thank you to Rich for joining us this week. This was a ton of fun. Thank you to all of you for listening. If you would like to discuss this episode with us, share your thoughts with us on doing maybe MCU by phases or more of these movies by hero. I'm not sure. Let us know. You can find us at SnarkSquad.com. where you can also subscribe to our newsletter, or you can find us on Twitter at @Snark_squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
You can find me at My Name is Marines.
And you can find me at Rich Cammy on Twitter and Instagram. And if anyone could tell me why Ralph Macchio got a special thanks at the end of the first Thor, I'd love it.
Half-assed research accepted. Thank you again for joining us, and we will be back in your ears again next week talking about The Last Jedi. Bye.
Bye.
I'm Odin about to die. Bye.